It's called Wales Next to Sea, A Small Port in a Wide World. It's a small port, there's no doubt about that. It has a very small fishing fleet. It provides support vessels for the wind farm. In the 1960s, 70s and 80s, it had quite a big coastal trade. Reading a book about the 12th century by a man called Ian Blanchard, I suddenly stopped still, opening a page, and there was Wells on a map. It turns out that in the 13th century, Wells was supplying corn to London. We traded with the northeast. The miners of Newcastle got our grain for their bread, and we got their coal. We traded with the Mediterranean, with Livorno, Ligorn, with Candia in Crete. The trade with the Low Countries goes back certainly to almost back to the conquest. It was easier and had better trade links with Antwerp than it did with the Midlands of England. As I started, the further I got into it, the more I discovered how complicated history was, and I was made very aware by Mike Welland, who knows more about the history of Wales in the last 300 years than anybody, that it's always dangerous to use secondary sources. But looking at original sources is very time consuming and involves a great deal of cross-checking, and sometimes they contradict each other. In the production of the book, a lot of people have been helpful, particularly members of the history group. Other people who've been helpful are local people. I'm an outsider, and I suppose there might be one or two people who are saying, who does he think he is, writing a history of our town? Some secondary sources which you can't avoid. One of them is John Barney's book, The Trials of Wells Harbour, which tells the story of the basically the collision of different interests in the 18th century between those landowners like Holcombe, like Sir John Turner, who wanted to embank, that's the word, marshes so as to turn them into farmland, and those traders and mariners who wanted the port to remain open. One of the most remarkable discoveries I made was that in the 18th century, 1750 in fact, the records state, the Public Records Office records it, a third of the exports of malt from this country across the North Sea came out of Wales, 116,000 quarters. In the 19th century, considerable quantities of barley and malt were being exported, some of it to the London market, because London was becoming a great consumer of beer. The First World War, with its legislation, damaged the malt trade very, very considerably. The other thing which happened, as I say, was increased mechanisation and new methods of making malt. Wales was an industrial town. There were foundries, there was of course the shipbuilding in the 19th century. They were making animal feed brought in by ship and processed by eastern counties. There was a flour mill, Sunshine Flour they called it, Dewing and Kersley's. So that Wales wasn't attractive as a seaside resort, except to local people. I mean, it wasn't. It had no hotels, so the town, outwardly, looks recognisable for what it was 100 years ago. But of course, it's changed. It's now a resort. It now relies on tourism. It relies on the wind farm, seeking to diversify. I think that its future is actually quite bright. Wales Next to Sea, A Small Port in a Wide World. I hope that it will prove to be something which will, what was it somebody once said, what's your hope as a writer? What would you want the reader to do? The answer is, I want the reader to turn the page.